A real horse head wrapped in dry ice, shipped overnight from a dog food plant in New Jersey to a soundstage in Los Angeles in March of 1971. Francis Ford Coppola had told the slaughterhouse one thing on the phone days before. Pick a horse that looks like the one in our movie. When that one is slaughtered, send us the head. The actor in the bed didn't know. John Marley was told the head would be plastic. He'd run through rehearsals with a prop. On the day of filming, the prop was gone. He pulled back the sheet, his bare foot touched something cold and slick, and he started screaming. Coppola did not call cut. That was the take. The scream, the one you've heard even if you've never seen the movie, is not acting. It is a man, 54 years old, finding the bone of a horse skull under his blanket without warning, on a closed set, with a camera locked off 2 feet from his face. Coppola wrote himself a note before he shot the scene. The note was on a yellow legal pad. It said, "If the audience does not jump out of their seats on this one, you have failed." They jumped. But the strange part of this story isn't the scream. The strange part is what happened after the movie came out. Because the people who should have hated it most, actual mafiosi, the men whose lives this scene was supposedly betraying, went into the theaters in the spring of 1972, and they came out speaking like the men in the movie. They called Hollywood to complain, they hung up, and they started living the script. This is the story of one severed head, a phrase Mario Puzo borrowed from a French novel published in 1835, and the strangest piece of life-imitating art in 20th century America. The thesis is simple. Hollywood didn't expose the mafia. Hollywood gave the mafia its script. Before March of 1972, the men running the 5 families in New York didn't talk about offers that couldn't be refused. They didn't kiss each other's cheeks at funerals. They didn't pose around tomato gardens with their grandchildren and call themselves Don. They were tax cheats and dock thugs and loan sharks. Some of them were elegant. Most of them weren't. They had codes, but the codes weren't operatic. After March of 1972, they were operatic. The kissing started. The phrase started. The dress code got sharper. The Italian word for boss, Don, which had barely existed in American mob speech, became standard. By the late 1970s, the FBI was recording wiretaps of grown men in Brooklyn comparing each other to fictional characters from a Mario Puzo novel. By 2018, a Bonanno family soldier was caught on a federal wire asking another mobster, mid-conversation, "You're gonna look like Barzini, or what?" A movie taught a criminal organization how to be itself. The horsehead scene is the moment that exchange begins. The film studio sent a real horsehead, by mail, in dry ice, to terrify an actor in a bed. And the men whose secrets the scene was supposedly betraying went home and learned, slowly and unevenly, that this was who they had always meant to be. To understand how the scene got shot, you have to understand how unbelievable it was that the movie got shot at all. Paramount didn't want Coppola. Paramount wanted Sergio Leone. Paramount wanted Peter Bogdanovich. Paramount wanted Costa Gavras. Coppola was 32, broke, in debt to Warner Brothers for a flop he'd directed the year before, and the only thing that put him on the list was that he was Italian-American. And the studio thought an Italian-American director would shield them from accusations of bigotry. Robert Evans, the studio chief, called him the cheapest competent person they could find. He almost got fired 3 times. Robert Duvall, who played Tom Hagen, said in a 2012 interview that Paramount kept a substitute director on standby for the entire shoot. One bad week, and the studio was prepared to pull the plug.
It was a battle all the way through. We all had a hard time. We had suffered a great deal, all of us. Francis was almost fired.
He was almost fired.
Coppola wanted to set the film in the 1940s. Paramount wanted it contemporary because period costumes cost money. Coppola wanted Marlon Brando. Paramount wanted Ernest Borgnine. Anyone but Brando, who they considered washed up and difficult. Coppola wanted Al Pacino. Paramount wanted Ryan O'Neal. The casting fights alone almost broke the production. The thing that saved Coppola, by every later account, was a single act of solidarity. Marlon Brando, who had been silent through the worst of the fights, told Paramount that if Coppola was fired, he walked. And in the middle of it all, Coppola won an Academy Award for co-writing Patton. Suddenly, he was a man the studio couldn't afford to humiliate. But there was a second pressure on the production, And it wasn't coming from Paramount. It was coming from the men whose lives the movie claimed to depict. In the spring of 1970, a Brooklyn capo named Joseph Colombo, head of one of the five families, founded an organization called the Italian American Civil Rights League. The League's stated mission was to fight defamation of Italian Americans. Its actual mission by the middle of 1970 was stopping the production of The Godfather. Colombo had read Mario Puzo's novel. He hated it. He believed the word mafia was a slur invented by the FBI, that no such organization existed, and that anyone making a movie that used the word was an enemy of his community. The League had over 100,000 dues-paying members. It had political reach. It had Teamsters. And it had Joseph Colombo, who, whatever else he was, had been a working capo of an actual New York crime family for 15 years. This is the moment Hollywood and the actual underworld walked into the same room. In February of 1971, producer Al Ruddy met Joseph Colombo at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. The Park Sheraton was the hotel where, in 1957, mob boss Albert Anastasia had been shot 4 times in the head while getting a haircut in the barbershop downstairs. Ruddy walked into the meeting alone. Across from him sat Colombo, his son Anthony, and approximately 1,500 members of the Italian American Civil Rights League. Ruddy made a deal. The League would back the production. The Teamsters would stand down. Coppola would be allowed to shoot in the actual neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Little Italy. In exchange, Ruddy promised one thing. The words Mafia and Cosa Nostra would be removed from the script. Every instance. You can check. They don't appear in the finished movie. Not once. But the deal had effects nobody had planned for. Colombo's people started showing up on set. Lenny Montana, the actor who plays Luca Brasi, the Don's enforcer with the famous Sleeps with the Fishes line, was a real Colombo family bodyguard, 320 pounds. He was on set because his actual job that month was protecting a Colombo associate who was hanging around the production. Coppola noticed him, asked him to read for the part, and cast him on the spot. Carmine "the Snake" Persico, who would later be convicted as the boss of the Colombo family, visited the set. Andrew "Moosh" Russo, his cousin, also a future boss, visited the set. They were not actors. They were, in their own description, technical consultants. And then there was the horse. The scene is constructed, in the script, as a power play. Don Corleone has asked a Hollywood studio chief named Jack Woltz to cast Johnny Fontaine, the Don's singer godson, in a war picture. Woltz refuses. Woltz is told he should reconsider. Woltz reconsiders in his bed when he wakes up next to the head of his prized racehorse, Khartoum. Woltz is fictional. Khartoum is fictional. But Woltz is also Harry Cohn, the real-life founder of Columbia Pictures, who had real-life mob ties, who had borrowed the money to take over Columbia from the New Jersey crime boss Abner Zwillman, and who, in 1953, had cast Frank Sinatra in From Here to Eternity after, by some accounts, being persuaded. The persuasion is undocumented. Sinatra denied it. But the scene Mario Puzo wrote in 1969, a faded singer with mob backing, pressuring a Hollywood mogul into a casting choice, was, in the careful eye of every producer in Los Angeles, a fictionalization of something everyone in the industry had been whispering about for 15 years. Sinatra read the novel. He recognized himself. He hated it. In 1970, before the film had even been cast, Mario Puzo was in Los Angeles for dinner at Chasen's restaurant. At that time, the celebrity dining room near Beverly Hills since closed. A friend of Puzo's, a wealthy Hollywood man, brought him to the table to introduce him to another guest. The other guest was Frank Sinatra. Puzo wrote about what happened next himself in the August 1972 issue of New York Magazine. He approached the table. He extended his hand. Sinatra, without looking up from his plate, said in 3 words, "I don't think so." He then proceeded to call Puzo a series of names, the worst of which, Puzo wrote, was pimp. As Puzo turned and left the restaurant, Sinatra yelled after him. One word, choke. There was no physical violence. There didn't need to be. Frank Sinatra had recognized his own life on the page of a novel, and he wanted the man who wrote it to know. So, when Coppola got to the day of shooting, the scene had weight. It was the moment the movie said, out loud, that the underworld and the studio system were not separate things. Paramount asked for a fake horse head. Coppola agreed. The fake was made. Coppola looked at the fake on the soundstage, in the light, under the camera. He said it didn't look real. He sent his scouts to a New Jersey dog food plant. The plant slaughtered horses for pet food. They had a continuous supply. Coppola gave the scouts a single instruction: find a horse that looked like cartoon. Same color, same shape of head. When that horse was scheduled for slaughter, send the head.
And the horse's head, we didn't kill the horse. We, animal lovers aside, most horses are killed for dog food. And so we went to the dog food company and we looked at the horses before they were slaughtered. And I didn't do it, but the art director found one that looked like the real horse. And they said, when you kill that horse, we want the head.
A few days later, a wooden crate arrived on a soundstage in Los Angeles, packed in dry ice. Inside the crate was a horse's head, freshly removed from a horse that had been killed for pet food in another state, and routed instead, as a special favor, to a Francis Ford Coppola production. The actor in the bed was John Marley. Marley was 54, New York stage actor, character roles his whole life. Coppola told him the head would be a plastic prop. He did not tell him the prop had been replaced. He did not tell him there was a real, freshly slaughtered head waiting in a refrigerator on the same lot. What happens next exists in 3 versions. Version 1 is the version Marley told on the Dick Cavett show in November of 1972, 8 months after the film opened. He said he reached under the sheet, his foot touched something cold and slick, and he screamed, because the cold touch was not what plastic feels like. He screamed because his nervous system, before his conscious mind, had figured out that the thing in the bed was an animal.
I haven't seen the scene, I don't know. It's a horse's head,
It's a horse's head, and it's a real horse's head.
Well, how do they get it? How do they do a thing like that?
I think the dog food people use horse meat, and they got the head from the dog meat factory and put it in my bed.
He told Cavett on camera that he wanted to erase the experience from his memory. Version 2 is the version reported by various crew members. Marley was warned in general terms that the prop might be different on the day. The first take captured genuine shock. The subsequent takes were performed. Version 3 is Coppola's version, which he gives in the 2001 DVD commentary. Coppola says he sent for a real head because the fake didn't sell the moment. He says nothing about whether Marley was warned. He says only that before the shot, he wrote the note on the yellow legal pad. If the audience does not jump out of their seats on this one, you have failed. The audience jumped. Within weeks of the film's release in March of 1972, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals received hundreds of letters. Coppola received them too. The letter writers had assumed, reasonably, watching the scene, that a horse had been killed for the movie. The truth was, technically, more complicated. A horse had not been killed for the movie. A horse had been killed for dog food. The head, which would otherwise have been ground into pet meal, had been routed instead to a soundstage, packed in dry ice, and used to terrify a 54-year-old actor. The American Humane Society did not have on-set authority over film production until 1980. The horse head scene is part of why. So, a real head, an unwarned actor, a director willing to ship a corpse from New Jersey to get the right shot, and a scene that depicted, more or less openly, a story about real Hollywood mob ties dating back to From Here to Eternity. That was the production. The audience that walked into theaters in March of 1972 walked in not knowing any of this. They walked out with the scream burned into a generation. The men who walked in already knowing, the mobsters who had been on set, the Colombo cousins, Lenny Montana, told their friends. The screening rooms in 1972 in certain neighborhoods were packed. Here is what nobody planned for. After the film opened, real mafiosi, the men whose lives Joseph Colombo had spent 2 years trying to keep off the screen, did not protest. They did not boycott. In no documented case did any of them complain that the film slandered them. They watched it, and then they watched it again. The FBI began noticing the change in the late 1970s. Wiretaps that had previously captured working-class Brooklyn dialect started capturing something else. Donder capo, consigliere, Italian formal address that had not been in regular American mob speech before 1972. By the 1980s, federal informants and turncoats were using the movie as a frame of reference. Henry Hill, the Brooklyn associate whose life would become Goodfellas, said he saw an early screening of The Godfather with his crew, and the crew came out of the theater feeling, in his exact phrase, that the movie was about us.
We used to turn my fucking stomach, you know. And I lived in fear every fucking day of my life.
But Henry's real life in the mob was far more vicious than Goodfellas could ever portray.
It's extraordinary.
It was not about them. It had been written by a man who, in his own words, had, quote, never met a real honest-to-God gangster. Mario Puzo said it bluntly. He had written The Godfather entirely from research in the New York Public Library. He had invented a culture. The culture took. Sammy the Bull Gravano, eventual underboss of the Gambino family, said he saw the movie in 1972 and was, in his word, stunned.
Well, I had done my research, and it was obvious that Joey Gallo had to be killed sooner or later. You know, just from the research I had done.
He compared his first murder, which he had committed 2 years earlier in 1970, to the scene where Michael Corleone shoots Sollozzo in the restaurant. Same, that he could not hear anything as he walked up.
He's not a serial killer, he was a gangster.
We kill amongst ourselves according to our rules.
He repeated Vito Corleone's lecture to Sonny. Never tell anybody outside the family what you're thinking. To his own crews, as instruction. He used the line as policy. The phrases entered the wires. In 2005, the FBI recorded a conversation in which a captain compared a hitman to a Luca Brasi being a fictional character. In 2018, a Bonanno family soldier was recorded asking, mid-meeting, "You're gonna look like Barzini, or what?" Barzini is also a fictional character. The mobster wife Lynda Milito wrote in her memoir that by the late 1980s, the men who came to her house were all acting like Godfather actors, kissing and hugging even more than they did before. And the phrase Mario Puzo borrowed from a French novel, Honoré de Balzac's Le Père Goriot, published in 1835, in which a character named Vautrin offers a young man an arrangement he cannot refuse, moved from a literary echo into the working vocabulary of the American underworld. Federal indictments started quoting it. Newspaper crime reporters started using it as shorthand. A line written by a novelist who had never met a gangster became the most familiar threat in 20th century American crime. Pre-1972, no real mafioso said it. After 1972, all of them did. Joseph Colombo, who founded an organization to stop the film, was shot at Columbus Circle on June 28, 1971, 3 months after the deal at the Park Sheraton, 3 months before the cameras rolled in Long Beach. The shooter was killed instantly by Colombo's bodyguards. Colombo lay paralyzed for 7 years. He died in 1978. His league dissolved with him. The word mafia had been removed from the film. It didn't matter. The film had given them everything else. The horse head was delivered in dry ice. The man in the bed wasn't told. The director wrote a note to himself that said, "If they don't jump, you've failed." And the men who were supposed to hate this movie were, in some cases, on the set the day it was shot. 320 pounds of Colombo bodyguard playing the Don's enforcer. A future Colombo boss visiting the production for color. A Brooklyn underboss going to an early screening and coming out feeling, quote, that the movie was about us. That is the inversion at the center of this story. The mafia called Hollywood to complain about the script. Hollywood listened, took the call, and made a few small edits. The word mafia gone. The word Cosa Nostra gone. The casting friendly. And then Hollywood gave them back their script. They hung up, and they started speaking the lines. A horse from a New Jersey dog food plant terrified an actor on a soundstage for 15 seconds in March of 1971. 50 years later, the FBI is still recording men in Brooklyn quoting the screenplay. Not the truth, the screenplay. Honoré de Balzac wrote a line in 1835 about a man making another man an offer he cannot refuse. A line in a public library in Manhattan, copied it into a notebook, and put it in the mouth of a fictional Sicilian patriarch. By the time the line had been on the wire for a generation, no one in the underworld remembered Balzac. No one remembered Puzo. They just remembered that this is what Don Corleone said. And they started saying it themselves. In the dark, when they meant something they could not say out loud. The most famous mob phrase of the 20th century is a French line from a novel about a young man's social ambition. It was never theirs. It became theirs because Hollywood gave it to them.